In today's world, data breaches happen all the time, and even the most secure companies can't always protect their employees' personal information from ending up in the wrong hands. That's where Delete Me comes in. Delete Me is a service that removes your employees' sensitive information from hundreds of data broker websites, sites where hackers can find phone numbers and emails within seconds. Rachel Toback, CEO of Social Proof Security, says attackers use this data to target employees with phishing messages and AI-powered phone scams. But Delete Me makes it harder for these bad actors by scrubbing your employees' details regularly. It's simple. Attackers are lazy. If it's too hard to find contact info, they'll move on to easier targets. Delete Me takes care of this for you, doing the heavy lifting so you don't have to. And over time, they keep removing the information so it stays down, protecting your team from constant exposure. If your business has a social presence or deals with clients, you need Delete Me. Visit deleteme.com/404media and start safeguarding your team's information today. That's deleteme.com/404media.
Hello, and welcome to the 404 Media Podcast, where we bring you unparalleled access to hidden worlds, both online and IRL. 404 Media is a journalist-founded company and needs your support. To subscribe, go to 404media.co. As well as bonus content every single week, subscribers also get access to additional episodes where we respond to their best comments. Gain access to that content at 404media.co. I'm your host, Joseph, and with me are two of the other 404 Media co-founders. The first is Sam Cole.
Hello.
And the other is Emmanuel Mayberg.
Hello.
Emmanuel, you recently went on a podcast run by friends of ours, Remap Radio. Do you just want to very briefly tell people what you did and maybe, to direct them to it?
Yeah, so our good friends at Remap, who are the folks who used to run Waypoint back when we all worked at Vice, have a podcast about homeownership and home renovations and just kind of like that everyday life stuff. And you all know very well because you lived through this with me. But I went through a big unexpected renovation at my place because of a flood, and me and Rob just talked about for 2 hours, and it was really fun and very therapeutic for me. And hopefully, if you care about that sort of thing, there's some useful advice and emotional support in that podcast for you.
And the reason I asked you to explain it is because, yes, we're going to talk about tech now, like we do every week, and then we talk about all of this depressing stuff. And what you spoke about on Remap Radio was also very depressing in its own way. But sometimes, if you just want to escape from tech, I don't know. Here's another fun podcast that one of us was on. So that's the reason I wanted to shout it out. But should we start talking about this week's stories?
Yeah, I really enjoyed that podcast. Just for another recommendation. Let's get started with one of Joe's. The headline is "The 200 plus sites an ICE surveillance contractor is monitoring." So obviously the headline kind of explains what's going on, but I don't think you really grasp the breadth of the sites impacted here until you click through on the site. We have the list published in the story. It's a lot of sites. It's a long ass spreadsheet. And it's a lot of stuff that you probably use, and I definitely use a lot of these. Joe, what is Shadow Dragon? Just to kind of get us started here.
Yeah, so Shadow Dragon is a private US company. And I suppose you could, I call it a surveillance contractor. That's one way I phrase it. Another would be sort of a open source intelligence company. Open source intelligence, the acronym being OSINT. And these are companies that really focus on gathering data that's out there in the public or the semi-public internet. So you can imagine social media networks, forums, websites, sometimes even apps as well. And I was about to say, I think people would be surprised about how much information is available about them out there. I don't think people are surprised by that anymore.
Not the listeners of this podcast, probably.
Right, exactly. Definitely not the listeners of this podcast, but just in general. I mean, even ever since I don't know, Cambridge Analytica. And I still think that was a massively overblown story for various reasons, but it kind of put into people's minds that, oh, this stuff I'm doing on social networks can be acquired by third parties. So Shadow Dragon isn't in the Cambridge Analytica world of, sort of political analysis, all of that. It is much more gathering data which could be useful to government clients and to private clients. And I didn't even go into that in the story, but they do have private clients as well.
Yeah. And they make a tool, right? So that's kind of like how they get a hold of this data. The tool is called SocialNet. Sounds innocuous. What does the tool do, though? Like, how does it work?
Yeah. So this was actually something that was kind of complicated to figure out. And I think we'll hear about that when I bring up what some of the impacted companies said. But in one way you could read it, that Shadow Dragon scrapes the internet. And I'll get into the nuances in a second. But scraping obviously is where you access a service. Maybe there's a public Twitter feed, or maybe you have to log into Blue Sky or something like that to then access information. But you're doing it in sort of an automated way rather than just manually scrolling. What makes Shadow Dragon a little bit different is that you have this UI, you'll type in, say, a username, just say Joseph Cox or whatever, and then it will bring up, well, do you want to search Blue Sky for that? Do you want to search Twitter for that? And all of that sort of thing. And the tool in this, I presume I've seen it as a pretty slick interface, will then go and pull that data from those various websites. So you enter a phone number, you then see where else that phone number is being used. You enter an email address, you see maybe what sites it's been signed up to, that sort of thing. But it isn't that there isn't like a big database of data that Shadow Dragon has already scraped. It's not like Clearview AI, the facial recognition company, which has all of these billions or whatever of faces scraped from social media. Shadow Dragon's SocialNet is much more live. It's like, it grabs the data when you want it to, which again, maybe they're not going to violate scraping terms of service with that. Maybe they are, but the end result is that you have this tool for its customers, and rather than them having to go, oh man, so what social network do I want to search, and potentially, accidentally revealing their identity if they like somebody's post or whatever and reveal that they're being monitored, this tool allows Shadow Dragon's clients to search the web in a really, really efficient manner that is explicitly designed to track targets' movements, behavior, relationships, all of that sort of thing. It's like OSINT streamlined on steroids, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is coming at a time that's a horrifying prospect anytime, but right now, because Shadow Dragon is a nice contractor, right? And the main thing in the news lately, as it should be, is these promises / threats of mass deportation by the new administration, by the Trump administration. And then obviously right after this story came out, we saw that ICE detained a lawful green card holder, and it's been happening more and more since then. So it's a really scary prospect to think that ICE, especially, which is trying to hit these numbers, I guess, hit some kind of quota that we don't know, to deport people, essentially, is using a tool like this that could just kind of dig through all of your online activity and find anything that could be construed or twisted or projected into being threatening or criminal or whatever it is, or anti-American or whatever you want to call it, siding with Hamas, which is what they accused Mahmoud Kahila of. So yeah, and there's a really good quote in here in your story from Jeremy Scott. Sorry. He's at Electronic Privacy Information Center, their project on surveillance insight. He said, SocialNet is just one example of the unchecked surveillance ecosystem that lacks any meaningful transparency, oversight, or accountability that allows the government to circumvent constitutional and statutory protections to access sensitive personal data. So he's basically saying this is just one example of the ridiculousness that is occurring, and it's great to bring that example to light. But ICE is not the only one using Shadow Dragon's services, right? Like, who else are their clients?
Yeah, and then just before on that, you mentioned the Mahmoud Khalil stuff. There is also the State Department plan. I guess we don't really have many specifics right now. It was reported in Axios somewhat recently that they're planning to use AI to automatically detect that sort of sentiment on students' social media accounts. Now, there's no indication that Shadow Dragon is part of that. If anything, Shadow Dragon's actually quite explicit in its marketing that it doesn't use AI. It's almost, we're the bespoke OSINT guys, and you don't need to worry about all of that sort of thing. But it definitely sits in that context. But yeah, as you say, it's not just ICE. You can go and find US government procurement data. You just scroll through it, and there's the State Department again on there. There's the Fish and Wildlife Service. It's really funny. Whenever you write about a surveillance contractor, you'll find the normal ones, like all the federal law enforcement agencies, and then you'll find like a random one, like Department of Agriculture or some shit, and it's just like, what are they using that for? And it must be, well, I'm going to speculate a little bit here. Fish and Wildlife Service, I don't know, protecting wildlife, protecting the environment, something like that. Somebody doing dumb crap around areas that they're trying to protect, that sort of thing. But then you have the normal ones like DEA is in there as well. And I think we previously reported when we first wrote about Shadow Dragon a couple of years ago, at this point, they briefly mentioned that they've worked with, or they've had like communications with the FBI as well. And we got some emails actually from Epic, that privacy organization you mentioned previously, and they showed that parts of DHS moved from another tool called BabelX, made by Babel Street, that we've spoken about before, and they moved over to Shadow Dragon in part for the price, which I think is funny because you'll look at all these emails, you call these capabilities, and all these surveillance contractors doing all of these sorts of things. And then at the end of the day, sometimes it just comes down to, well, this one's like 10K cheaper, so we're just going to get that, probably. But yeah, they are, I would say, they're not like a massive US government contractor, but they're definitely picking up more customers in part of that DHS switch. But, I just check the databases every so often, and I see Shadow Dragon again and again.
Yeah, so let's kind of get into, I guess, the specifics of the 200 plus websites that you mentioned in the headline. I mean, I don't know. It's a lot. It's like if you ask me to list every website and app, this would be the list. It's everything from like OnlyFans and eBay to Fur Affinity, Gab, Duolingo, Bing, AllTrails, my precious AllTrails, my unproblematic AllTrails.
Well, it's funny. Yeah, it's funny you bring up AllTrails because I think that's one way of looking at it. Is like when I first got the list, it's almost like overwhelming. Like, oh my god. Well, obviously, always plans to publish the list because I think it's useful for people to see that either for their own activity or for policy experts or whatever. It's useful to see the specifics, but you can kind of put it into brackets, and this is what I did in the article with the AllTrails one. I almost put that sort of in the bracket of hobbies and that sort of thing. So as well as AllTrails, I put Book Crossing, some book website, chess.com. It's a pretty funny one. A cigar review site called Cigar Dojo, and like by themselves, you'll think, what? So they're gonna like know that I like cigars or I like chess or something? Yeah, sure. But then on the other side, the AllTrails one, I mean, maybe that could have some useful information about, oh, they like hikes in California or Southern California or Northern California.
Like very like pinpointed location data too. I mean, that's right. It follows you all along a very specific path.
And this didn't come up specifically in this list, but it does remind me, obviously, of the Strava leak. Strava, I think that was it, the running app.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? And how that was revealing the location of sort of unpublished or undocumented US military bases and that sort of thing. This isn't quite the same because it's not so much about revealing locations as it is about tracking an individual person. But if you know that somebody's using those sorts of hobby apps, maybe you can drill down and get some more information from them. And you mentioned OnlyFans as well, and I'd really be interested to hear your thoughts on this, Sam. But like, there's clearly some like sex worker sites in here.
Yeah, there's a lot of porn sites. There's like every major porn site is on here. Sites. Pornhub, Xhamster, Xvideos, ePorner. Yeah, it's a ton of them.
Now, to be fair to Shadow Dragon, they do explicitly talk about in lots of videos about combating child sexual abuse. I'm not saying that it's these sites specifically, but you can see where there might be sexual sites in the list. That being said, you know, if ICE or DHS or whoever wishes to more aggressively go after sex workers, I mean, which they already do, right? For visa issues or anything else, they can just scrape OnlyFans or Just for Fans. Does that sound right to you, Sam?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's something that like sex workers have been talking about for years, obviously, but and it's kind of come to light in various different other contexts too, where tools like this are being used. But it's like someone will be denied an Airbnb booking because they suspect that like the host knows that they produce porn, or you know, it's like someone who's trying to like get a custody battle for their kids is on OnlyFans, and then it's like the opposition finds out that they are on OnlyFans, and then they use that against them, and they can't get their kids. It's just, or like even with like mortgages and things like that, it's something that sex workers deal with a lot. So it's definitely interesting to see porn sites on this list for sure. And it's a conversation that's happening in the adult industry in general. Is, you know, how much data should we legally be forced to give sites in general, but especially adult sites, because that's what's being targeted with the age verification stuff. It's like uploading an ID or a license to Pornhub, for example. It's like, you know, these like leaks happen all the time, and then also you have like systems like this that can kind of pry in and see your activity. So, yeah, it's for sure super, super interesting to see.
Yeah. And then apart from the normal social networks, and I mentioned like Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and stuff, it's like, well, now there's Snapchat and TikTok and various meta platforms, and like, obviously they're all included in this list. Like, it would be very surprising if they weren't. Then there's payment stuff, which I find especially interesting. I can't remember if Venmo's on there. Like, it must be.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So Venmo's on there. And then PayPal, which I think owns Venmo, right? And then stuff like Cash App or Buy Me a Coffee. Buy Me a Coffee is interesting because, like, wow, that's a relatively small one. But it's all these different brackets of sort of the OSINT that they're trying to do. And then I guess sort of the last one is just like, there are some super niche sites or forums or whatever, which are very directed towards specific demographics. So there's Black Planet on there, which is geared towards Black people. There is FetLife, which is a fetish forum, right, or website. And then I think there's some furry stuff on there.
There's some furry stuff on here.
Okay, thank you for corroborating. It's more just that. Yes, they will go to any community or any site that they think could provide some value at some point in the future to their government or private clients. And I guess I would say, like, web scraping is pretty straightforward. You know, you can write a Python web scraper very, very quickly. Use something called Beautiful Soup, you pass it, whatever. But as I think I've said on an earlier episode, if you're selling to the government, they're going to want the tool to be very reliable. So, like, Shadow Dragon is, I think, fairly, I'm assuming this, they're going in and they're making their scrapers quite dedicated and specific. It's like, if I'm ICE or whoever and I click, I want to search this profile, I don't want it to fuck up. I want it to be accurate. I want it to get the data very, very reliably. So that is presumably a lot of the work that Shadow Dragon is putting into this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you talked to or you got a hold of some of these companies that are on this list, right? Like a lot of them I know did not reply, but what did the ones that did reply have to say for this?
Yeah. Maybe I'll bring up the list of the ones that didn't reply as well. I can read that out in a second. But sort of, well, on one hand, not surprisingly, a lot of the companies said, hey, this probably violates our terms of service on scraping, and we don't like it. Probably the one that gave me the best statement, simply because it was detailed and on the record, was actually chess.com, which said, we were not previously aware that Shadow Dragon was scraping data from our site. And, they say they do not permit the use of personal information from our users without a valid legal basis and compliance with applicable laws. And they said, if it's done legally, fine, but we didn't know about this. Then you have Meta saying the normal stuff, which is more pointing to the terms of service. Same with Snapchat as well, Pinterest. They all just point to the terms of service, which says, don't scrape us. You're not allowed to do that. And again, that sort of brings me back to the thing I mentioned a little bit higher, which is is this in a legal sense scraping if it's not creating a database of the data? And I need to brush up on the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act when it comes to scraping, because there's been a few cases somewhat recently in the past few years. But I'd be interested to see what people do now with that argument, because some of these companies clearly weren't that happy with it. That being said, many didn't get back to me. Those are Twitch, OnlyFans, Tinder, MyFitnessPal, GitHub, FlightAware, Etsy, eBay, Duolingo, Blue Sky, Apple, Amazon, and Reddit. And the last one I'll say is that Proton Mail got back to me because they're also in the list. I didn't include their statement because I found it a little bit potentially misleading. They were like, end-to-end encrypted, so nobody can read your emails. It's sure, but that's not what's being alleged here. They're talking about scraping what's potentially publicly available. My suspicion is that you enter an email address and it then checks whether you enter a username, and then Shadow Dragon then checks, well, is there a username associated with an email address on Proton Mail? That's my assumption, but I don't have that solid enough to put in a full article. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting and important and a good time to get this sort of list out, basically.
Yeah. And what did Shadow Dragon have to say for themselves?
So when I asked Shadow Dragon if this constitutes scraping, and I, sent the list of sites as well, they said Shadow Dragon doesn't log customer inquiries or the resulting data, so we can't provide information that violates the privacy settings of individual account owners using these platforms, including data they've deleted. So as I say in the article, in other words, the searches are performed live on the sites when the Shadow Dragon user requests it. And Shadow Dragon is saying, we're not violating terms of service because we're not making this massive database of information. I don't know. I guess we'll see what people make of that.
I'm sure this is not the end of Shadow Dragon.
No.
Okay. Let's leave that there, as Joe says.
Yeah.
And then we'll be back with a story by Emmanuel about brain drain. Cue the music.
One of the smartest apps you can have on your phone in 2025 is Upside. Upside gives you the power to earn more on the stuff you buy all the time. Whether you're filling up your tank, going out to eat, or shopping for groceries, the Upside app lets you earn cash back on every purchase. Upside users are making as much as $280 a year. I recently downloaded Upside and I've quickly incorporated it into my daily routine. Whenever I'm at a restaurant, gas station, grocery store, or convenience store, I just check my Upside app to see if I can earn cash back. I've been pleasantly surprised to learn that it fits into my lifestyle. Upside cashback offers are available at a lot of the places I'm already going to. It's also helped me find new places I never visited before. To get started, download the free Upside app. Use our promo code 404 and get an extra 25 cents back for every gallon on your first tank of gas. Next, claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. Then pay as usual with a credit or debit card, follow the steps in the app, and get paid. There are over 100,000 gas stations, grocery stores, and restaurants on the Upside app, ensuring that cash back is always just around the corner. You can earn an average of 8% on restaurant and grocery purchases. And the best part, you can even stack your Upside cashback on top of your credit and debit card rewards. Download the free Upside app and use promo code 404 to get an extra 25 cents back for every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's an extra 25 cents back for every gallon on your first tank of gas using promo code 404.
Hey, it's Joseph again. If you're a new listener to the 404 Media Podcast, or even a long-time one, you might not be aware of all of the impact our journalism has had recently, or how we even got here in the first place. In 2023, the four of us quit corporate media to go independent. We were sick of working for a VC-backed company that put profits before journalism. That gave birth to 404 Media. Since then, we've stopped the spread of AI books in public libraries, triggered class action lawsuits against AI companies, got Congress to pressure big tech in various ways, and we've even shut down surveillance companies. This real-world impact is only possible because of our paying subscribers. As a journalist-owned business, they are the engine that powers our journalism and where the vast majority of our revenue comes from. So please consider signing up today for $10 a month or $100 a year at 404media.co/membership and get bonus content every week and access to all of our articles. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the podcast. All right, and we are back. This story is written by Emmanuel. The headline is NASA, Yale, and Stanford scientists consider, quote, scientific exile, end quote, French university says. Sorry, Emmanuel. This actually starts with another story you did. I can't remember if we spoke about it on the pod, but you did this first story about this French university and then this new one. So just briefly, what is this French university and what did they previously announce?
So in early March, I got a press release from this university in France called Aix-Marseille University. It's the largest, I believe, research university in the country. And they announced this program called Safe Place for Science. It is something that they've done under other names in different forms over the years, but basically it exists to allow people, scientists, researchers in countries where they're no longer able to do their research because of the political situation, and inviting them to this university in France in order to continue to do that research there, both to support the scientists and also to support this research, which in many cases is about climate, health, things that will benefit all of humanity. And the difference is that this time the program is targeted specifically at American scientists who we have heard from since Trump got into office and started issuing all these executive orders that we've reported on that ultimately result in pulling funding from universities, from government agencies that do research for clearly political reasons. You know, we've done a lot of stories about how the administration is nuking the existence of any page or paper that mentions diversity because they have this crusade against DEI. And that has obviously affected researchers as well. If you're studying, let's say, how cancer treatment is impacting people in certain communities, certain minorities. I've heard from people who have had that type of research funding pulled. So the university is inviting American researchers to come do this research in France. And it is not just words. They have 15 million euros allocated for this. And initially, the plan was to have 15 scientists from the US come and do this research in France.
Gotcha. So that's the context. That's what happened before, and the broader climate in which, scientists in the US are finding that they probably can't continue their work. What happens now? Basically, the university had an update, right?
Yeah, so I wrote that story, and honestly, the reason I wrote it is because the fact that a French university would offer this is just sort of humiliating to the United States in a way. I mentioned this in that initial story, but when we think about scientists moving to different countries to continue their research, like the two examples that come to mind is in Nazi Germany, a lot of Jewish scientists fled Germany to the US to continue doing their research. That plays a big part in Oppenheimer, the movie, if you've seen that. And
thank you for making that current. So people,
it's a good portrait of that type of scientist and why they would move. And then the other example is obviously like the Cold War and Russian scientists defecting to the West. Like that was a big thing that was happening at the time. It is not something that, as far as I know, we've seen happen from the US to other countries. Like usually people come here to do advanced research at private companies, at universities, at government agencies. Historically, America has been the draw for that type of thing and not pushing people away. That's why I thought it was notable, but I kind of wrote it and moved on. It seemed a little bit like, if you read the wording of the French press release, there's a little bit of, I don't know, it's hard for me not to read it as like mocking the US a little bit.
Yeah. And you don't know, it is sometimes hard to tell that, yes, they say they've put money on the line, but like, have you, you don't know necessarily how seriously to take it, not through any fault of their own, just because I think we're pretty skeptical people, until this next story where, I mean, it looks like people are interested, right?
Yeah, so two things happen. So I published this story and I immediately start hearing from scientists in the US who are like, hey, like, I just read your story. Like, can I get more information? Like, is there somebody I can talk to? And how do I get involved in this? Which was surprising. And, I just pointed them at the university's website if they were interested.
Surprising, especially because you don't work at the university, for a start.
Yeah, so. But it just it's the level of interest, right? There was like a real level of interest. And I was like, notable. Like, I'll just like make a note of that. But a week later, the university put out another press release, and they were just clear about the fact that they've heard from a lot of scientists, and it's scientists at the leading American universities and agencies here. And I think they said they've heard from like 25 from researchers at 25 leading institutions, and that they're already working. There's so much interest that they're working on expanding the program and working with the government to get more funding and arrange housing for these people, and then also possibly working with other European universities who can absorb all these scientists, because the way they describe it is like there's so much interest that maybe some of them can go to other countries and do work at other universities.
Yes. So you managed to then actually speak to somebody who, I'll let you correct my phrasing of it, but either they have expressed interest, or they're considering it, or they've at least reached out to the university. What did they have to say about this?
So this is one of those people who reached out to me shortly after I published the initial story. And when I started writing this story, both you and Sam gave me the very good note, which was like, okay, like this is an interesting press release, but it would be better if we heard from one of the people who is actually interested in doing this. So I reached out back to this person and I said, hey, are you one of the people who is doing this? And they are in the middle of the application process of taking part in this program. And unfortunately not able to say a lot about what they do and where, because that they believe would endanger their current position before they secure this new position. But I would say that it is one of the top institutions at the country, and it is very. It's not like some obscure, weird liberal arts field of study that this person is in. It's like it is a hard science important field of research that they're in, but their funding was pulled because the work overlaps with some concept of minority focus, and they're no longer able to do their research. Their funding was pulled. They're kind of running on fumes, the money that they have already secured, and they're thinking about what's next. And for them, the only option is to look for, other countries, other universities that are still interested in doing this kind of research.
Yeah. So, what are we seeing? Is it potentially a brain drain? And I mean that in two ways. The first is that kind of what you spoke about with earlier historical cases, and I would add, East Germany and the Berlin Wall and there as well. That's one thing with like people leaving, and then almost the much more immediate one is just like, as you say, research being stopped. And it's like, well, okay, even if they don't leave, the research is being killed, essentially. Like, what do you think some of the impacts are that we've already seen of this? And, what might we see in the short to medium term with this?
Yeah, so the immediate impact is real, and that is across agencies, across universities, there is a hiring freeze, and not only a hiring freeze, people who have already been accepted to PhD programs have had those offers rescinded. And these are not small universities that were already teetering on the edge of insolvency or something like that. It's like Harvard has a hiring freeze. There is one of the Massachusetts school. It's a UMass school, I believe, but it's a big medical school, and they've had PhD offers rescinded. So these are people who have been accepted to research positions, and they thought they were going to start working there next year, and that's not happening.
Including cancer stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a big one of the I live next to one of the biggest children's hospitals in the country, one of the best ones in the world. And I know somebody who is like in neuroscience there that's doing very important research, and like her research was pulled, which I think is like, so there's the immediate economic job losses issue. But the thing that really freaks me out, and I don't know, like the way things are going now, you can pick what you want to be freaked out about. There's no shortage, and it's hard to like say what is the worst thing, but I don't know. I'm pretty rocked by this idea that it's going to take us time to feel the fact that the administration has kind of sold the future away. Like if we keep going, like things can still turn around. Maybe the midterms come around and they reverse course in some way, and money comes back and funding comes back. But if this country doesn't have the draw for people to research cancer and anything, artificial intelligence, right? Like a lot of that work is being done in private companies. Maybe that work for now continues to happen here, but a lot of it is also being done at government agencies and universities. Like a lot of progress is being made at these places that are no longer getting funding. And I think because the administration talks a lot about the DEI aspect of it, maybe people find it easy to dismiss as, oh, we're just losing that stuff. But it's not just that stuff. It's like across the board, Harvard, one of the best schools in the world, no hires. That's not a good place to be. That's not like a world leading democratic country, scientific powerhouse. That's not where you want to be as a country. And that's where we are right now.
Yeah. And sorry, just last thing. What does your coverage maybe look like in the coming weeks, months? Is it speaking to more people who are considering leaving and that sort of thing? Like, what are you thinking?
So there's already been a lot of coverage about the type of science that has lost funding. And unfortunately, there's so much of it that I imagine that I can probably do some of that as well, and just focusing on some of the stuff that we're losing because of these executive orders. But then maybe also like what is the future of this research? Where is it going to happen? Where are these people going to go? What does it look like for the rest of the world, for the US to not be like the center of so much scientific progress? I'm definitely interested in that. Like, I hope that if these people can't get funding in like here in the US, that they can go to France and continue that work there. But we don't know. Like, we haven't seen this kind of shift before, so it'll be definitely interesting to follow how this all shakes out.
For sure. Well, on that horrible note, we will leave it there.
You're welcome.
Well, that's what I said at the top of the show. Go listen to the other podcast for a laugh, and then because we're going to talk about this sort of stuff. But if you were listening to the free version of the podcast, I'll now play us out. If you are a paying 404 Media subscriber, we're going to talk about something that is actually very fun and very interesting: how Super Nintendo consoles are getting quicker as they age, as in the hardware ages, and somehow the consoles are performing better / faster. Really interesting stuff. You can subscribe and gain access to that content at 404media.co. As a reminder, 404 Media is journalist-founded and supported by subscribers. If you do wish to subscribe to 404 Media and directly support our work, please go to 404media.co. You'll get unlimited access to our articles and an ad-free version of this podcast. You'll also get to listen to the subscribers-only section where we talk about a bonus story each week. This podcast is made in partnership with Kaleidoscope. Another way to support us is by leaving a 5-star rating and review for the podcast. That stuff really helps us out. This has been 404 Media. We'll see you again next week.